So,
Welcome to Obscurigami, a
Yes.
podcast where we talk about obscure things. I'm Ben,
and I'm Thomas.
coming to you live from the Hollywood Hills here in Massachusetts.
This joke won't make sense anymore because none of the pretext is in the podcast.
Dear listener, you should know that this is our second attempt at recording this podcast. The first attempt was way better.
We've redone the first 6 episodes. They were all lost in a sandstorm. And so we've started
sandstorm?
over. Yes.
Where did the sand come from?
It corrupted my hard drive. Live from Dubai.
It's Saturday night.
Yeah. There's going to be a very clear, first recording of the night will usually be, very somber.
Right.
And just a generally serious.
That does seem to be the emerging pattern.
Yeah, and then the second recording will be one to lift your spirits. Sort of a manic depressive cycle, but I feel like that keeps things fresh.
A little bipolar.
Yeah.
Never hurt nobody.
So it's it's election season at the time of this recording.
Somewhere in the world.
And this will be most likely relevant by the time you listen to this, unless it's literally hundreds of years from now, the downfall of America has happened. I think that's the best case scenario for this podcast. It goes out onto the internet,
Mm-hmm.
It gets lodged there in just the eternal data vortex.
So it's kind of like we're throwing darts in a bar and we accidentally throw one in amongst the bottles on the wall and
Right.
it gets lost there.
And it sticks and it gets lost there. And thousands of years pass, and the dust is 6 inches thick in this bar. Civilization has crumbled, but this bar still stands. The bar being the internet. And alien group of forensic historians
Mhm.
comes in, and they discover this bar, and they're scouring it for all the little tidbits they can learn about the past culture, so they might study it and see what they can learn from the failures or mistakes or curiosities of the culture. And they stumble upon one of the darts, that being our podcast,
Right.
and they give it a listen, and it's not in their language, so they can't understand it. But we've achieved our goal.
Maybe in the future people will think this is music. They'll be like,
Possibly.
oh yes, this is what people of that time
I feel like
listened to
I feel like
for musical enjoyment.
if that happens, episode 2, which one was the
Nobody knows the numbers.
magma episode,
Oh gosh, I don't know.
would be a perfect sort of inception
Right.
of
Music within the music.
music within the music.
But at that point, they might actually be speaking Kobayan, so they would understand it.
Wow, mind blown.
We've come full circle.
Yeah, I'll probably cut all this out.
Let's return.
Needless to say, presidents have been on everyone's mind. And so I was thinking, if I could talk about an obscure president, that would be interesting. But who would be the most obscure U.S. president?
That's a tough call.
I did a little Googling, and there's a few candidates for this position. An article in the New York Mag, nymag.com, which I'll give the link to Ben so you can put it in the show notes for all of you, which you can find at obscurigami.com, helped me narrow it down a little bit. And they were choosing what they were calling the nation's least known president. And they're...
Which I guess would be synonymous.
Yes.
With what you were looking for.
With what I was looking for, which would be the most obscure. Their criteria was no one from the 20th or 21st century. They deemed that too recent, so too recent in everyone's minds.
Mm-hmm.
The founding fathers were too famous. John Quincy Adams, also too famous. They figured that people who served 2 terms were probably more likely to be more memorable, along with anyone who was assassinated or died in office would be particularly memorable. It couldn't be any of the famously worst presidents, because even that infamy would be a kind of fame.
Right.
no one who was impeached or oversaw a war or had a distinctly memorable name, such as, Fillmore, Van Buren, Rutherford B. Hayes, or distinctive facial hair. So Chester A. Arthur.
Van Buren again.
Mutton chops. So according to this highly subjective analysis,
they put a lot of
thought
criteria
into that, and I have to give them credit.
We should put that much thought into our podcast.
You should go read their article, but long and short of it is they came to the conclusion that Benjamin Harrison is our nation's most forgotten or least remembered and most obscure president.
Benjamin Harrison. Single-term president.
Who was a man.
Presume.
Yes. Who...
he was a man.
Benjamin Harrison was part of a president sandwich. He won the election to, I believe, incumbent... Benjamin Harris is part of a Grover Cleveland sandwich.
Right.
Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president. Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd, and then Grover Cleveland came back into office after Benjamin Harrison.
The only man to ever do that, I believe.
Yes.
Grover Cleveland.
So Benjamin Harrison, same thing about him being the least remembered or potentially most obscure president is that he's also possibly one of the more boring presidents we could have ever had. Not much interesting or of note happened during his time in office.
What years was he in office?
Years 1989 through 1893.
1989.
1889. I'm sorry, through 1893.
That's an odd term.
Yeah.
He started in 1989 and worked his way back for about 100 years.
He's most notably a time traveler. He was descendant of the Harrison family in Virginia, which arrived in Jamestown. He was a Presbyterian, was very involved in his church all the way up until his presidency.
In what capacity? Was he a pastor, or
he
just
was not a pastor,
in
but he was just involved in leadership.
Oh, gotcha.
I did not. I didn't read specifically in what capacity, but yeah, he was involved in leadership there. In 1850, he transferred to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, for grad school.
There's a Miami University in Ohio?
That's exactly what I said. That's why this factoid is on here.
Well, gee dang it.
Apparently, Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, is the 10th oldest university in the United States. Is still open.
We should have just done an episode about that.
Miami U.
Miami in Ohio. And the city that this town is located, that this school is located in, is called Oxford.
Yes. Also known as Miami U, Miami of Ohio, Miami University, Ohio.
Right. That's like having a Boise University in Paris, Texas.
Yeah. It's I'm surprised I've never heard of it because it's not that. It's ranked like 82nd among national universities.
Wow.
It's not necessarily an unknown
not that obscure
university. But yeah, he graduated from there. He was a member of two fraternities. He was very, very active. He was in school for law.
Is that where he did his law study as well? Or did he study something else?
Yes, I believe so.
Gotcha.
He did go on to later do some study at some other schools. Let's see where he went somewhere, but prior to Miami U. Oh, Farmers College near Cincinnati, Ohio. He was there 2 years. He met his future wife there, Caroline Lavinia Scott. He was a regular frat boy.
I wonder if frat boys looked different in the 1840s.
Interestingly enough,
we picture them today.
He was the fourth United States president to have a full beard, and none has had a full beard since.
Really?
Yes.
He was the last U.S. president to have a full beard. We need to change that.
I know. We need to get somebody in office with a full beard stat. His inauguration ceremony took place during a rainstorm in Washington, D.C.
You got to watch out for
obviously.
those.
Yeah. And the outgoing president, Grover Cleveland, held an umbrella over his head.
Really?
While he took the oath of office.
But these guys ran against each other.
Indeed.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that kind of congeniality in today's political climate.
It is. This episode is, I'm not going to attempt to give a thorough and comprehensive overview of Benjamin Harrison's life.
Mm-hmm.
For that, you'll have to do your own research. I just tried to grab the most interesting tidbits about him.
You can edit that and put that part at the beginning.
Yeah. Prior to getting into office, he served in the Union Army in the Civil War.
Was he an officer?
There's an interesting story behind his involvement.
So he's not a Virginian then, even though his family...
He was born in Ohio, North Bend, Ohio. Yeah.
But was he a senator for Indiana before he was elected president?
Yes, I believe that is correct. Okay. Yeah, he was a senator. So after Ohio U, he moved with his then wife Carolyn, to Indianapolis, Indiana, where he would practice law until going into the Civil War, and then he would return to Indiana, serve there as a senator briefly. His involvement in the Civil War was an interesting one. He wanted to enlist, but he was worried about being able to support his family, and he expressed to a governor that he would serve if there was an opportunity for him to do so. And the governor, Oliver Morton, he told him if he couldn't serve, he could possibly at least recruit a regiment for the Union Army. And Harrison recruited in northern Indiana. Once he had recruited that regiment, Oliver Morton, the governor, offered him command of it. But Harrison declined because he didn't have military experience.
Or I guess training, really?
Yeah, he had no prior military experience at all. He was commissioned as a captain and a company commander on July 22nd, 1862, and then later commissioned as a colonel. He moved from commander to colonel and eventually would become a brigadier general of volunteers, nominated to such by President Lincoln.
How did he become president, I guess? And then why is his time as president so forgotten?
So his entrance into politics was somewhat hesitant. Like even his movement into becoming a senator was in response. Initially, the first time he ran for office, he just stepped in on a ticket after some people, the Republican candidate had stepped down, and he was basically just like convinced to run. The first time he ran for senator, he didn't win that time. He would later go on to win, but it doesn't look like it was ever really something that was a primary. He sort of stumbled into politics.
Kind of like he stumbled his way into command.
Into command in the army. Yeah, it doesn't seem like he really had a career mindset.
Right.
In politics.
Did he only serve one term in the Senate?
I believe he did only serve one term. Yes.
Yeah.
So his eventual entry into, when he ran, the year he ran for president, there was a favorite for the Republican nomination. He was the previous nominee who lost to Grover Cleveland, and that was James G. Blaine. Blaine denied interest in nomination, and
he basically wasn't going to run again.
Yeah, he wasn't going to run again. And there was a number of other candidates who were attempting to take his place and run, and Blaine did not endorse any of them. And eventually, on March 1st in 1888, he privately wrote that the one man remaining who, in my judgment, can make the best one candidate, meaning is Benjamin Harrison. And
he didn't make that public, though. That was a private.
Yeah, he didn't publicly endorse him, but he wrote that privately to someone. Harrison was low on the first several ballots. He eventually rose to popularity. Even his campaigning for president was really something that just kind of happened out of like someone else choosing and endorsing him. And
Right.
Clearly he didn't resist that in any way, but it doesn't seem like he ever really set out to be there.
And it can't be like the people of the country hated Grover Cleveland because they reelected him again later.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and really, and really, you asked earlier, what is it about him that specifically makes him so unmemorable? And it's really that just like nothing significant. He came in, he served one term. His platform was not on anything massive that had a big impact on the development of our nation. He was a proponent of civil rights. He tried to do a lot to protect the civil rights of the recently freed slaves in the South. But a lot of what he tried to do was unsuccessful. A lot of his biggest attempts to get things done in Congress were closed down. And so in reading about him, a lot of the things that I came across which he was notable for were basically like, oh, well, he's notable because he signed provisions for, and one example is he's the president who signed provisions for formation of the original national forest, but there's not a distinct sense that like that was his
thing. When I think of the national
he
forest,
had a hand in doing, but it wasn't like he was, I'm going to make a national forest, and then he pushed that through Congress and like made it happen.
It was just kind of a thing that happened.
He just, there was a bill and he signed it, and then he appointed some national forests, and that was that.
When I think of the national forest, I think of the national parks, and I think of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
That's kind of his legacy.
Yeah.
But that's because Teddy Roosevelt took such a hand in making that his own legacy. Like he didn't just sign a bill. Like he went out and spoke about it and talked about it a lot and became associated with the national parks.
Yeah.
So
everything I read about Benjamin Harrison just seemed to suggest that he seemed to be largely an opportunist, someone who was there and willing to just do what needed to be done, but not someone who was, quote unquote, fighting for anything specific or trying to make a name for himself.
I'm curious if people at that time were dissatisfied with that kind of a president, because to me, from the political climate that we live in now, looking back at that, it seems almost refreshing to have the idea of someone who is taking on the responsibility, even though they don't necessarily want to.
Right.
As opposed to the people that we see now who it just seems like they want power and they'll do anything to get it.
I think that and just the presidency was a different sort of thing. I think that attitude was more common in general then, but of him specifically even more so. But it doesn't seem like he was not well received. It just seems like he very lukewarm in reception. There wasn't much to hate about him, and wasn't also much to love. Interestingly, he was, and I think this was the biggest downside, which did lead to kind of the backlash and the re-election of Grover Cleveland. He was the first president to spend $1 billion in the national budget. So he was a very spendy president, and
that didn't go over so well.
Go over so well. Yeah, he really modernized the Navy. It didn't happen while he was in office, but he was very interested in having a naval base in Hawaii, and he supported the annexation of Hawaii. He had an active foreign policy. So an example of one of the ways he involved himself in foreign policy was there was an issue where there was a European embargo on U.S. pork that happened because there was unconfirmed concern about trichinosis in our pork, and Europe had embargoed our pork.
What is trichinosis?
Trichinosis is parasitic disease caused by roundworms. During the initial infection, invasion of the intestines can result in diarrhea, abdominal pain, and vomiting.
I would embargo that.
So yes. So yeah, there were unconfirmed rumors of parasite in our meat. Harrison worked directly with France and Germany to get those embargoes restored, and then he got a Meat Inspection Act passed to help keep inaccurate accusations like that from happening.
If he did all these things, he must have had a pretty good relationship with his Congress, or at least agreeable enough to get some of his ideas put in place.
One story that is told about his kind of diplomatic personality, when the states of North Dakota and South Dakota were admitted into the Union, they were notoriously rivalrous, and disputes would kick off over just the tiniest of issues, and there was concern about which would enter the Union first.
Right.
And so when he signed them into the Union, he took the papers for their admittance into the Union and he shuffled them up so that no one could see which was which, and he signed them both so that no one knows whether
which
South
one became
or
a
North
state
Dakota
first.
became a state first. And he did that intentionally to keep that from becoming a point of contention among the states.
That's interesting.
So
I didn't know that.
He was good at diplomacy and those little things. Anything that was trying to push the boundaries, it seems like he didn't meet much success. At age 62, he remarried after his wife had died to Mary Scott Lord Dimmick, the widowed 37-year-old niece and former secretary of his deceased wife. So,
wow.
He married a...
Say that again?
25...
His wife's secretary?
His wife's secretary and niece.
Oh.
Who was widowed. So his wife had died, and then his wife's secretary and niece, her husband died.
Right.
And she was 25 years younger than Harrison. And he married her. Harrison's 2 adult children at that time, Russell, who was 40 years old, and Mary McKee, who was 38, disapproved of the marriage and did not attend the wedding.
Wow.
So that was one little paragraph of information in Wikipedia, and I was like,
that sounds like a story unto itself.
Yeah, that's just one of those situations where you're like, I'm sure there was much more going on there than what meets the eye.
Yeah, that's interesting because you described him as a person who's so kind of influenced by events around him, but that seems like an unusually, like running off with the secretary.
Yeah.
After your wife's death sounds like a very deliberate sort of act.
Maybe he was fed up with being an opportunist.
Well, fun fact to conclude that discussion: in my youth, my mother had a placemat with all the U.S. presidents on it at that time. And I would, when eating my breakfast or whatever meal, I would look at all the presidents and I would pick my favorite. And my favorite was always Benjamin Harrison because we had the same name.
Yeah.
He's the only president named Ben. So
there you go.
But I knew absolutely nothing about Benjamin Harrison.
Yeah, you didn't know that he was the last president to sport a beard.
Until now.
His vice president, Levi P. Morton, also a very unnotable man. One of the most significant facts about him was that he died at age 96 on his birthday. And he's the only vice president to have died on his birthday.
The only one in history.
Yeah. Benjamin Harrison happened to be the first U.S. president to be recorded. And there is a single audio recording of him speaking.
As President of the United States, I was present at the first Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Well, that was very informative.
I'll manage to hack something together out of that mash. I think that's like 45 minutes. So yeah, there'll.
That'll be.
I'll cut all my confused bits out of the.
That'll be second only
out of the
to
middle
the
and patch
gas turbine car episode.
Yeah.
Of Doom.
Well,
so we've come to that portion of the show where we hit the random button on Wikipedia, and then we explain to you what we find there.
And I'm clicking. Oh, great.
Oh, no. It was bound to happen sooner or later.
So the article that has been brought up is triple correlation.
The triple correlation of an ordinary function on the real line is the integral of the product of that function with two independently shifted copies of itself.
Clearly. So basically this. Well, we can give some of the history because the meaning of a triple correlation escapes me.
I did not understand the sentence that I just read at all. Yeah. Other than that, it's a function.
We can paste the function into the show notes.
So it has something to do with statisticians and laser beams.
Hideyagamo in 1963 described an apparatus for the measuring of triple correlation of a laser beam, and also showed how phase information can be recovered from the real part of the bispectrum.
Let's see if Jerry...
I think we stumbled across something truly obscure.
Well, no, it can't be that obscure if it's fundamental to the... Well, maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not even sure.
I mean, I think it's obscure in terms of its application.
Right, it must be a fairly specific application. So if you ever watch movies about disease and there's a whiteboard or one of those like clear
things that they're writing
that they write on, the functions that we're looking at right now look like what's written on those whiteboards. They don't look overly complicated. They're just beyond my understanding.
Well, we've hit the brick wall of our understanding.
Yeah. This has been a unique episode.
This has been a unique episode.
Truly.
It's going to take a lot of editing, but
my best wishes to you as you undertake that process.
I can persevere. Well, that's...
Well, if you know about triple correlation and can explain to a couple dum-dum heads what this Wikipedia article is even the heck about, then please, by all means, reach out to us via email. Our contact info is in the show notes.
And
check us out on Obscurigami.com. Well, there you have it.
Well, yeah, if you have any interesting topics that you think we should explore, you can email them to us.
I haven't checked the show email in a while. They can send ideas, but it's like sending your idea out to pasture. Right. Like it may or may not come back.
Yeah, if you really want to hear a podcast episode about whatever it is your idea is, like the most expedient route would be to just start your own podcast.
Right.
Spend
a few months doing R&D.
Right. Do that episode.
Right.
Because it'll probably be better too than whatever we slap together in a couple hours. You might venture beyond Wikipedia. As we so rarely do. Oh, there's hope for us yet.
I'm optimistic about the future of this podcast.
Me too.
I don't know if you still are.
No, I am.
I guess it's over.